Hello and welcome back to The Art of Parenting. This is your host, Jeanne-Marie Pennell. And today I have Joel Warsh, who is a integrative doctor, pediatrician. I hope I'm saying all of that right. I'm going to let you introduce yourself, but we are going to talk about children's health. I've had a lot of guests here who are parents with children with health issues, but I'm so happy to have an actual medical professional here to talk a little bit with parents today. So thank you, Joel, for making the time to be on The Art of Parenting today.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm excited to chat.
Yeah. So I always like to get started with having my guests define what is the art of parenting for them.
To me, the art of parenting is really figuring out, with your family, what are the best ways to create the healthy, happy home, to create a healthy, happy, resilient kids. And so to me, that's really the art of parenting. It is figuring it out as you go. I think a lot of parents really feel like they should know more, or are very stressed as they become a parent, and because there's such an unknown. And so really, to me, I guess the art of parenting is figuring it out as you're moving along through the years, and what works best for you and your family.
Right. And when you say, knowing everything, it seems like today there is just so much information that it can be a little overwhelming. It can be misinformation. We don't come to you and say, what should I do? We go to Dr. Google and ask, what should we do? Right.
Yeah, and that's one of even the big reasons why I wrote my book, and that's kind of the title, right? Parenting at your child's pace. It's really figuring out what works for you and your family, because there is just so much information out there, which I think is good and bad. It can be good because you can research things and figure stuff out that you would never had a chance to do before, but also it can be so overwhelming and take you down all of these paths that are really stressful, that don't really need to be, because the internet can make you really scared about things that really you don't have to worry that much about, or you kind of go down that rabbit hole on the little symptom when it's really just a cold.
Yeah, right. Well, thank you for that. And just before we get too involved in our conversation, I'd love if you would take the time to introduce yourselves to our listeners, our viewers today, and a little bit about your background and how you came to write the book that you just wrote.
Sure. So, I mean, you said it, perfectly correctly at the beginning, and I'm an integrative pediatrician. So, to me, that really means I did all the regular medical training. I trained at a Great Western program, but I did get a little bit frustrated with the regular system and medications for everything all the time, and so that's what led me to start learning about natural medicine and integrative medicine. I'm not against Western medicine at all. I always say that. I think it's really important. There are lots of amazing discoveries that we have made over the years, and if you need an antibiotic, it can save your life. If you need to go to the hospital and get an MRI, get an X-ray, that's great. These things are life-saving, but we're way too quick to use medications these days. We have an ever-increasing rate of chronic disease. We don't really focus on prevention, and we don't focus on the basics. And so to me, that's where integrative medicine comes in, and really getting back to basics, focusing on prevention, and working with all the modalities that are available out there. And so that's what I try to do as a pediatrician. And so that I started working in a regular hospital, and that got me a little bit frustrated. So that's when I went and started working in Beverly Hills, and then I ended up opening my own practice in the Valley of Los Angeles. And I guess I've been a little bit lucky in terms of where I'm located. I get to work with a lot of prominent people, which is pretty cool. But I got to really see how interested people were in integrative medicine, which I never had imagined how interested people were. And my social media has grown pretty fast, I guess, based on people's interest in that. And I, as a doctor, you don't get any training in social media or writing books or any of that stuff. But I found that it's great to help patients in the office, but you can only help so many. So that's why
Right.
I started doing the social media stuff. And then now, working on a book as well that's coming out, really soon. I guess depending on when you're listening to this, soon, or maybe it's out already if you're in the future. But I wanted to write a book it's called Parenting at Your Child's Pace for the first 3 years, because I wanted to get to parents early. I want parents to get a balanced perspective on a lot of these common questions that we get as pediatricians. Talk about all the information that's out there and try to help parents figure out what's right for their family, help parents de-stress a little bit, and then also put in a little bit of the the integrative health and wellness, because most parenting books are written by therapists and they're great. But there isn't a lot from pediatricians, and there's just some different information that or different advice that we might give than a therapist, because it's just different backgrounds.
Right, right. And just so that we're on a good, playing field, I would love if you could just maybe define what is integrative medicine, right? I mean, I think we all have an idea of it, but coming from you and what you do in your practice, I would love for you to take the time to do that.
Yeah, I define it as blending the best of modern Western medicine with alternative and holistic practices, meaning we'll use Western medicine whenever it's reasonable, but there are other modalities out there, like using supplements and herbs and acupuncture, and therapists and all sorts of other practitioners. Nutrition, right? Nutrition.
What we eat, what we put in our body every day. Yeah.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
it's like, it's so obvious to say, kind of, but in medicine, it's not, right? Like, we just don't get a lot of training in nutrition, really well trained in identifying something very serious, but not a lot of training on the basics of nutrition or how to counsel that or even think about that. So that's where I think the future needs to be. And, maybe it's not the doctor doing it, but maybe it's working in teams. I don't know. But I think that these things are so important, and we should, and we need to get back to basics, because the direction we're going with our health is not great.
No, no. And you mentioned a little bit about chronic illness. Have you seen a rise in that in your practice over the years? And what's your take on it, and how should we be mindful to not maybe, go down this rabbit hole of thinking it's the worst case scenario?
Yeah, so that to me is kind of a two-part answer, because
Okay.
where I work now, I feel like it's a very self-selecting population of individuals who are somewhat holistic minded to begin with. So I feel like I see a lot less of a lot of these things in actual current practice, but not statistically speaking. Like, statistically speaking, the numbers are exponentially right. Like, it's insane how high the rates of chronic disease are. 50% of kids around have a chronic disease right now.
And when you say chronic disease, what defines chronic disease?
So acute illness, acute infection, acute disease would be something that's, you get sick, you get better, you get the flu, cold, those kind of things. Chronic disease would be something that's more long lasting. So something you're not outgrowing. It's happening for years. You're taking a medication for it. So we're thinking about things like eczema, allergies, asthma, mental health conditions, like things that are not 1 week long or a couple of days long. It just lasts over a long period of time and might kind of come and go over time. And so all of those things, we're seeing, explosions of that, whether you talk about autism rates, whether you talk about ADHD, whether you talk about mental health conditions. I mean, now the statistics on mental health, 50% of kids, 50% of teenagers, when they turn 18, have had a mental health diagnosis already. 1/3 of teenage girls have thought of suicide. 1/4 have had a plan. 1 out of 10 have tried. Like, those numbers are not okay, and that really does lead back to our health. And to me, it's so scary as a parent that we're here. And if we have 2 kids, then by statistics, one's going to have a chronic disease, one's going to be on a medication every day. Like, that's not okay with me, not as a parent, not as a doctor. And so I really have been trying to help parents from day one and try to get ahead of these things and think about the basic foundations, what we actually can do to make a difference.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that, because I just finished reading Bad Therapy. Have you read this book?
I haven't read it, but I know.
Okay. It's fascinating because it's what you're saying of how we're just overdiagnosing maybe children, right? So there's this need of wanting to know, having answers, wanting to label them, but then we're kind of doing them a disservice, because then we go, through medication or therapy and all this. So that's a conversation for another time. But what you're saying about, the rise, what do you equate that to? Like, I guess I have 2 questions about that. Is, first of all, like, where do you see that coming from, or what is causing this uptick? And then how can parents prevent that, or, buffer themselves so that there isn't, one of their children. I have two children. Thank goodness. I knock on wood. They're both fine. No medication. um, they're young adults. They're on their own.
That's amazing.
But yeah, how do you, first of all, what do you perceive why we got to where we are today? And then what can parents of young children or any age children do today to kind of prevent that?
Yeah, well, that's the right question, right? The question is why, and unfortunately, we don't know why, right? We should. I mean, if we have something that's such a huge problem, this is something that should be one of the most heavily researched, most talked about things in the news. But it's just not, which is unfortunate. So that's where I would start with that question: is that we don't know for sure, but I think we do know a lot based on common sense and the things that we do know. And to me, the two biggest areas would be our food and the toxins that we're exposed to. And I think that over the last 50 or so years, well, you even go back farther than that. I mean, originally we were so worried about diseases, right? Because people would die at 40, and that was kind of the way that things were. And we got better with that in medicine, and we got better with sanitation, and people have been living longer. But now with getting better at that, and then now kind of moving into an industrialized world where things are faster and cheaper and easier. I mean, that is a good thing in
And
general.
modified.
Yeah, right, and modified. So that there's some good to that. But what we lose with something that's cheaper or more simple or easier is health, right? Like there's a cost to everything, and it is good that we have enough calories for people to eat. But at the same time, if you're not eating good calories, if you're not eating healthy food, if you're not eating locally, if you're not getting the nutrients because you're getting something really quick, you're losing something. And we've moved to this place now where the food that we eat, even in the best circumstances, isn't that great in general, and is sprayed in a lot of chemicals and is filled with preservatives and a lot of sugar and all sorts of things, and not to mention all of the other chemicals that we're exposed to. And we're literally built of what we eat. And if we're not consuming the nutrients that we need to be healthy, and we're also bombarding our bodies with the chemicals in our food and then in everything else, then it's really, to me, no shock that at some point, most people just can't handle it anymore. Their immune system can't deal with whatever's going on, and they either get a chronic disease or they get really sick from something more mild. And we saw that in COVID, right? I mean, that's one of the things that we did see. If there's one thing that we really learned from that time, is that those with comorbidities were the most susceptible. But that's not really new news. I think we knew that already. It just kind of shined a light on it a little bit more. But that's true of everything else. We're not that healthy at baseline. Our kids are not that healthy at baseline. They're exposed to way too much, way too soon. And I don't think we can handle it anymore.
So basically, you're telling parents to take a step back, slow it down, and, grow your food if you want to go to that extreme, or just be super mindful to I always say, locally grown, organic, seasonal food is the ideal. I'm lucky to live in an area where I can get a CSA box, community sponsored agriculture. So I actually just received my box before we got on the call, and it's always a surprise. So there's, I don't know what's in the box, but it's always, I know that it's fresh, it's local and such, but that's not, accessible to everybody.
Sure. And so what I think is really important to start is the first thing is to understand that there is this issue. I think that we need to first recognize that there's a big issue with our health. And if we aren't mindful of what we're doing, then our kids are going to be sick and we're going to be sick. And if you're okay with that, then we're okay with it. But I think as a doctor and as a parent, my job is not to sugarcoat it. It's to say, here's what's going on, and we want to do something about it. So I think once you recognize it, then you have to decide for yourself and your family, okay, what are the small things that I can do to make a difference over time? Because the good thing about the fact that it's rising so fast is the fact that it wasn't that way just a few years ago. So we can move back. And that means that we have a lot of ownership over what's going on. And so therefore the little changes can make a big difference. And that's what I try to help, try to talk about as much as I can, and just remind people that little changes make a huge difference. So you don't have to move to the mountains and start your own farm. You can. I have friends that actually did that, and some people do, and that's fine, but that's not the reality for most families and parents. So then the question is, okay, what can you do? Well, the first thing that you can do is be a mindful consumer. You don't have to have a PhD in chemistry to read a label.
Right.
And anybody, every time they go into the store, you should be reading every label of everything that you buy from now on forever. Or buy things that don't have labels. If that's real, actual food. But I mean, you need to be a conscious consumer. Go at the labels, look at what you're buying, and turn it over. It doesn't mean that you have to swap out your chips for broccoli on day one with your kids, but you can go to the chips aisle, look at 3 different bags of chips, all can be the same price, and pick the one with the better ingredients. If it has a long chemically named thing that you don't even know what it is, it's probably not good for you. So buy the
Right.
one with the words that you actually know. And then as you start to get into this, okay, maybe you can learn a little bit about some of the things in there. Maybe you see a word on there you don't know, then you go read about it. And it does snowball over time. And if you do that for all the food that you purchase, if you do that for everything that you put on your skin, creams and lotions and suntan lotions and all the products you buy in your house, then that adds up. It doesn't have to be more expensive. It could be sometimes. Sometimes we got to spend for our health, and that's reasonable wherever you can. But you just got to do whatever you can do, and each little thing adds up. And I'll give you a really good example of this. I love to talk about. There was a great study out of Harvard, and they were looking at soup. So they gave participants 5 days of canned soup and then 5 days of homemade soup. And in those cans, like usual, there's a BPA lining. So what they were looking at was the BPA levels in urine. So they gave them those 5 days of canned soup, took the urine levels, looking at BPA, then gave them 5 days of the soup that it was homemade, took the BPA levels. The difference was 1,000% for BPA in just those 5 days. So why I like that study so much is because it's such a great example of little changes making such a huge difference. 5 days eating one food, 1,000% difference. Now imagine that over every single food, every single thing that you purchase, it adds up. And if you give that
Definitely.
kid BPA every day for the next 5 years, well, maybe that's going to be too much for their body versus just making a homemade soup. So there's
Right.
little things that we can all do.
Right. And I make a lot of soup. I make it all my own, and I love involving children in cooking. So have fun with your children making soup. They love washing and peeling vegetables. So
Yeah, keep
that's
them when they're young. I mean, get them
exact.
involved, teach them, get them to do it. They love it a lot more if you get them involved, and especially if they're the younger age kids. My kids are right now 3 months and 4.5, and they don't really know other food. Right? They don't know any other food other than what we have. It obviously, it gets a little harder once they get older and they're out in the world. But at least in those first few years, I mean, you control everything that you purchase. They don't have other food really.
And it's funny you say that because when they do go out into the world, I think we've educated their palate as to know what is good food. Because I actually have a memory of my son, so my youngest, who's now 23, but when he was little, we never go to fast food. Like that's something that to me just is full of everything you mentioned earlier. So I just, have always avoided it. And I don't know, one time I guess he did go to one of them, and every time we would go by the and see the emblems, he was like, "Oh, that's disgusting." So he knew for himself, right? It wasn't so I think it's so important what you say of just starting them young and not thinking that we have to give them all this baby food or food that is made for them. I think children just eat what we eat. So
Yeah, and I love that you say, mention teaching them, because I think it is so important. Like the 4.5-year-old, he does understand. I mean, obviously at an age appropriate level, but he understands the basics of healthy food versus unhealthy food, stuff that makes you not feel good, stuff that makes you sick. Those kind of concepts, they're important from day one. It's not about shaming food. It's really about teaching them about health, so that way they can make educated decisions as they get older. And I'm also not a proponent of all or none, like they should never have a piece of cake or never have any sugar. I think that doesn't work either. But I think that if you can control 99% of what they eat, especially for the first few years, then if they do go to a party and there is a piece of cake, then you say, okay, well, we're going to party. And so now's a special treat. You can have one piece, you can have this piece of pizza, whatever it is that is important for you. And I think that's fine if they eat it every now and again. You'll be okay. It's the constant eating of these things that you run into an issue, I think.
Right, right. And it's buying sweets and having those treats and all of that. So yes. Thank you. Thank you for that. And just making it easy for parents, right? It's not changing an entire lifestyle and, like you say, moving to the mountain, growing your own food, but just being mindful of what you put in your system. Um, what any other kind of concerns that you have, or that you're seeing, and kind of some other changes that we can be making?
One of the other things that, kind of going in a different direction here, is just the stress level of parents. That's one of the
It's a big one.
big ones that I really wanted to get, through the book. And that was kind of one of the big themes, is helping parents to de-stress, just because we're living in a very different time now than I feel like, was even a few decades ago. To be a parent, it used to be that you'd have really a village around you, grandma's there, and maybe cousins, and everybody there, so you can kind of bounce things off of them. Now that's not always the case, and we're bouncing everything off of social media, which isn't always real. And we're bouncing things off the internet, which can make you more stressed than ever. So I definitely try to remind parents, if we're talking about Googling first, I think that some people are like, don't Google if you're, I don't think that's true. I think it's fine to do it. Just, it's important to understand that when we do use the internet, that it can take you down a rabbit hole. So you have to be mindful of putting things into perspective. And just because you have one symptom does not necessarily mean that you have the scary thing. Most scary things have all the basic symptoms, but the scary things have a lot more to it. And so that's, where the doctor really does come in, kind of putting the picture together. So that's something that can be really, really helpful. I think that's kind of one side. The other side is really comparing ourselves to other people. Um, and I think that while it's okay to have a general idea of what's going on, comparing yourself to a social media ideal is not realistic. And a great example that I love to give is kind of the 1 month old visit in the office, where nobody's at their best with the 1 month old, right? We haven't slept, got spit up all over you. Things are kind of probably chaotic in the home a little bit at that time for most people. And I get to take care of a lot of pretty prominent people that individuals know, and I'll see them in the office, and maybe they're not looking their best, and they're pretty miserable, and maybe even in tears. And then I might see their social media post like 20 minutes later, perfect photo with probably a crew behind them, hashtag bless, hashtag love being a mom, hashtag love being a dad. Everything looks perfect, and I'm like, I just saw you 20 minutes ago and you were in tears. But if you don't know, then you're comparing yourself to that when it's not even real, or maybe the rest of their house is in chaos, but not that one little photo. So I just think it's important to put that in perspective for parents,
Right.
that we're all going through it together.
Yeah. It's a highlight reel. It's not reality. And by the way, I love your social media, because your whiteboard that you hold up with always a very good message is always right on. So I
Thanks.
much appreciate your wise words there. Um, and so that was actually one thing that I was going to ask is you talk about the stress, and for me, a lot of it comes from like over information, right? Where it's right there in our hands. It's where we're constantly, have access to it. And it's interesting because I interviewed just a few days ago somebody who has a low tech family. So she actually opted on putting her own phone on all the parental controls, doesn't have internet on her phone and all this, so that we don't go, to technology for answers. Instead, we pick up our phone and we call our doctor and say, there's this going on, and so forth. But yeah, I digress.
No, and I also want to say, like, and I think that even in the best case scenarios, we are just so much more exposed to all the bad stuff. We're exposed to the news, we're exposed to the things that are meant to make us click and look. And again, that can be good because we're a little bit maybe more informed on some things, but on a lot, we're just too over-informed about everything. And we're, in this cycle of being stressed about everything. And for, the vast majority of people, especially in the Western world, this is the far and above least stressful time to be a parent that there ever was. There are certainly things out there in the world that are very stressful, but at the same time, we have safety standards like we never had before. We have seatbelts. We don't have lead paint. We have pool gates. They used to have like cocaine and heroin and all sorts of drugs and like mercury in regular products. It's like we have a lot of knowledge, and we're a lot actually safer than we ever used to be in so many ways. But we're exposed to all the terrible things going on in the world and all the terrible things going on in your community all of the time. And so it definitely, I think, seems sometimes like it is worse or more chaotic than it really is. And especially in comparison to the past, it's probably not worse than many times.
No. It's probably a lot safer. But, like you say, it's the fear mongering and just keeping us, afraid to let our children be children too, because, the whole lack of independence that our children have, the surveillance that we have on them and tracking them and so forth. That to me is a stressor as a parent. Like I choose not to do that because I in our home, no news is good news. Like if you don't call me in the middle of the night because you've had an emergency, it's a good thing, right? So,
Yeah. No,
but
it is. And I think that, I don't know if it's for better or worse, but I mean, I feel like when we were growing up, or certainly, decades ago, it was like you let your kids go outside when they were older and you'll see them at dinner and they just go down the street on their own. And I don't know that that's better or worse, but it's certainly not a thing that people really do as much anymore. And maybe that for good and bad, I think that's a part of it is over fear. A part of it is genuine concern, but I think there's also more fear that we have with all the stuff going on, criminals, that kind of thing, where maybe we just weren't as informed before, but actually the numbers are lower. That's what I've read.
exactly.
Numbers are
The numbers are lower. The numbers are lower. That's the thing. It's just to keep you in this constant stress. But that's that's a tough one. What how do like you say there's pediatrician and there's integrative medicine, and you started out as a Western medicine doctor. How are you looked upon by, let's say, quote unquote, regular pediatricians? Like, do you get along? Do you, work with colleagues that don't have your background of integrative medicine, or is it something that's looked down upon?
I think it depends on the doctor. I think that integrative medicine as a field is, I don't want to say it's looked down upon, but sometimes it's seen as woo woo, depending on who's doing it and what they're doing. I think that for me at least, we definitely straddle the line a little better than some. So we're not very woo woo and out there. We're not doing things that are extremely would be like very difficult for a regular, let's say, pediatrician to comprehend or understand. They might just not know about it. I certainly send people to specialists and work with other doctors that are not integrative all the time. So I think I'm somewhere in the middle. It's really tough because when you have this integrative world, the media and the things that get portrayed a lot more seem to be the like really out there stuff, when really most of it's in the middle. And I just think that the education's not really there. I mean, we're all on the same team, right? We all want
Right.
we all want healthy kids, and I think it's just a difference of what's the best way to get there. But I can promise you that if any pediatrician was given really great evidence that X, Y, or Z supplement worked really, really well, they would do it. It's just that a lot of this stuff doesn't have the same data and research because it doesn't come from a pharmaceutical company, which doesn't have the dollars to do that kind of research, and so we get in this weird world that I always find is really weird, where you have the pediatrics of like, oh, everybody should get vitamin D as a baby, and everybody needs to get their iron checked, but then all the other vitamins are weird and woo woo, and it's like that doesn't make any sense. It's just that
Right.
ones have had a little bit more evidence, and so I think, and I hope that over time, and what I'm seeing, it's starting to bleed in a little bit. I think that chronic disease is so bad, and that what we have at our disposal is not so great anymore for a lot of these, that people are looking outside for solutions. And I think maybe acupuncture is the best example of something that was pretty woo woo 10-20 years ago, and now with the opioid epidemic, it's like we can't use those anymore, so let's find another option. And now every hospital has acupuncture pretty much in it, and it's not woo woo anymore. So I
Right.
think that we're seeing a slow movement towards it, and people are getting a little bit more open to it. Certainly, the younger generation of doctors is a little bit more open to it because they don't really have a choice. I think at this point.
Right. And when you say other modalities, do you use also homeopathic?
Yeah, we have those in the office, so we'll offer some of the like more basic homeopathy. Some of the other integrative doctors are trained homeopaths, so
Okay.
they'll make
Okay.
their own. I'm not a trained homeopath. I've learned about it, so we have some of the like Boiron, other kind of products in the office that we can offer to people, or I'll just tell people about it. But I think that's that's a great modality for kids because there's such a low risk. I mean, basically no risk when you're using it,
Right. Right.
and so many people find it very helpful. And to me, at least at a minimum, a placebo effect, you can get great effect from a placebo effect for something. So even if it isn't really helping that much, it still helps a lot because most parents want to do something. And when you go to a Western doctor, that thing that they do, even if they don't need to often, is an antibiotic. And there's side effects to that
Yeah.
potentially. So I think homeopathics have a great option for pediatrics where there's not a lot of other options available for something that parents could do.
Right, right. I asked because out of personal experience, I had my first child in France and my second here, and just so different, both prenatal, postpartum, but also just pediatrics at an early age. I had a homeopathic pediatrician, and she would always say, we try the homeopathic first, and we give it, 24 hours, and if not, then we move to something stronger. But most often, homeopathic worked just fine. And here with my second, complete opposite, where it was just like antibiotics right away,
Yeah.
which was very surprising and kind of hard. So yeah.
Yeah, we're just not exposed to it here, certainly not in training. And those kind of things are again seen as woo woo and out there by most doctors. But I think if American medicine was exposed to something like France medicine and they see that like, okay, all the pediatricians in France are doing this thing and they've decreased their antibiotic prescriptions by 90% and their kids are just as healthy. Well, I think most pediatricians are like, okay, well, maybe these are some things that I could try, but it's just not presented in that way. It's not an option here.
Right.
And so that's what happens. And that's why we have prescriptions through the roof. But that's a bad thing. Everything is connected. Every disease, any study you ever look at, if you have a prescription in the first 6 months to a year, that increases your risk for every disease.
So true. So true. Well, thank you for all of this. I mean, it's a lot of food for thought of how we can kind of, pay attention and maybe seek out more holistic practitioners as well, and just the little changes we make. So thank you for all of that. So you mentioned you have a 4.5-year-old. And I always like to wrap up with just circling back to your parenting. And so if you were to go back, 5 years when you were first expecting this first child, are there any wise words that you would tell yourself knowing all that you know today?
Yeah, I think it's just to enjoy it as much as you can. I think it goes by really, really fast. And we're so, I mean, at least for me, even for me, it's one of the things I mentioned as a joke at the beginning of the book is like, people just assume, oh, you're a pediatrician, you must be ready to be a parent. And that's so easy to be a parent. And like, yeah, okay, obviously, like, some stuff about medicine and that can be helpful in very specific situations, but you're not really prepared to be a parent. So everybody is stressed. And I was certainly nervous. Like, am I going to do a good job? Do I know what I'm doing? Are we going to keep this kid alive? And the reality is, how to do this. It's innate to all of us, and we do figure it out as we go. Nobody knows how to do it. Everybody feels a little bit like they don't know what they're doing, and that's fine. But as you get to like your second and third child, from all the families that I've seen, and certainly for myself, by the time you get to second, you're like, yeah, this is no problem, whatever, it's fine. But that's the way that we should be going, kind of with the first kid. It's like we can do this, and it's not any harder really with the first kid than the second kid, but we're so much more stressed, I feel like, and every parent that I've seen in the first kid.
For sure. I mean, I think it's true that, and the first child is our we're testing we're testing things out, and it's true. Like the second one, that they're not going to break, and that it's, it's everything's going to be okay. But love that. But yes, it does go by very quickly. And I'm sure you're seeing it now with your 3 month old, and how, 4.5, 3 months is pretty big. This has been wonderful. Any parting words that you would like to leave our listeners and our viewers with today?
Yeah, I'll just say that parents, you got this. We can do it. And there's a lot of stressful things out there, but people have been doing this for a long time and forever, really, right? And
Yes.
we can figure it out. We got a lot more information than ever before, and a lot more resources. And I think that it's okay to be a little nervous, but don't be overly stressed, because you're gonna do just great.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Joel, for taking the time to be on The Art of Parenting today. This has been very helpful.
Thanks for having me on.